When I was just 16, I had a life-changing year that has shaped my entire spiritual and professional life since. I was an exchange student living with a family in Milan, Italy, and studying at a Jesuit liceo, where I was taken one day at this time of year to the ancient Basilica of San Ustorgio, where I was shown the tombs of the three kings under a bell tower that is topped not by a cross but by a star. I knew even then that pious stories about holy relics are not always literally true or historically true. They're just symbols of more eternal and universal truths. Great Jesuit scholars have taught us much. Take the notion that the love that first brought this universe into existence, that still moves the stars and planets themselves, as Dante put it, that sustains this fragile earth that we so often take for granted, that love could appear in a little town at the very edge of a mighty empire and in the form of a newborn, red meat, screaming baby, helpless in a cattle trough, born to poor, unsheltered parents who had to nurture him while fleeing a cruel ruler to save his life. Yeah, that's timeless. That the creative power and redeeming power of the universe could appear in that way. Stories are developed to interpret what we most need in our innermost lives, or to interpret such hallowed stories. And the story of the kings, it has an origin that's just like that. It's only told, in the Gospel of Matthew, who was not exactly a reporter for the Bethlehem Star, but rather a Jewish Christian whose gospel dates to 2 generations after the events he describes. According to Catholic biblical scholar Raymond Brown, our nativity scenes and our Christmas carols tend to mush together his version with that of Luke. That is, with the shepherds and the angelic message of peace and goodwill, the Charlie Brown version, which is only found in Luke. Matthew has just the Magi. Bothered that so little was known about the birth and origin of Jesus, all they had to go on was that he was Yeshua Bar Yosef, the son of Joseph. That he had a mother named Miriam. That he'd been raised in Nazareth, in the Galilee, and that was a puzzle because the Messiah was supposed to come from the city of David, Bethlehem. So Luke, speaking to non-Jewish Christians, remembers that there was an imperial census around that time, and he makes that the reason why Joseph travels and takes Mary to Bethlehem. In Matthew, however, there's no inn or stable. They already live in Bethlehem. And Joseph seems modeled on the Joseph of earlier legend in Genesis, where you may recall he goes down into Egypt, not willingly, and is a dreamer and an interpreter of dreams. While the visit of the Magi may have been inspired by a visit around the year 66 of the Common Era by a king from Armenia and his astrologers who came to pay homage to Nero in Rome, it was Matthew's way of saying that the emperor is not the real Lord of the universe. God's Messiah is. And Joseph, in his first dream, according to Matthew, is told that he is not to abandon Mary just because she is pregnant and he had nothing to do with it. That, said William Blake, makes Joseph the first incarnation of unconditional love and a fit model and teacher for the child he helped raise. The second dream comes after the Magi have gone to King Herod seeking the newborn king and brought their gifts to Bethlehem. After they had left, he says, an angel appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you." Would, O God, that the women and children of Gaza had been allowed to flee into Egypt more recently. But the current Pharaoh there closed the border, and another slaughter of innocents took place in the year past. And then Herod dies, and Joseph has a third dream telling him now it is safe to return. But on the way, a fourth one saying, "Don't go back to Bethlehem. Settle in the Galilee, in the town called Nazareth." My wife Gwen is a priest in the Episcopal Church, and she once worked at their headquarters in New York in refugee resettlement for Episcopal Migration Ministries, where she kept an icon of the flight into Egypt hanging in her office. She knew that Latin Americans, as many of us know around here, like Ethiopians, celebrate the three kings, Los Tres Reyes, almost more than they do La Navidad. And so do Italians, by the way. Several times I've returned to Italy in the wintertime when it isn't overrun with tourists. And one year, Gwen and I and some friends found ourselves at the celebration of Epiphany, the Feast of the Three Kings, in a fishing village along the east coast of Sicily. It was the proverbial one-horse town because they only had one horse for the three kings, and the other two had to walk. The child wasn't found in a stable, but rather in a fishing boat pulled up on the beach. And the kings, they didn't bear gifts. They came empty-handed. And when I asked about that, "Dove sono I tesori, I regali?" Where are the gifts, the treasures? A woman in the crowd replied, "I veri tesori non sono materiali, sono spirituali." The real gifts are not material. They're spiritual. She reminded me, and Gwen reminded me, that other women have always commented on how those kings could have brought more practical stuff, like a little baby food and some diapers, maybe. You know, in the Monty Python version of the story, The Life of Brian, Mary's mother pops out toward the end and says, "Next time you can skip the myrrh." My very first spiritual mentor was a Unitarian minister named Jacob Trapp. We'll hear one of his hymns at the end. And he once wrote his own poetic meditation based on the three treasures in the Tao Te Ching that we heard earlier. This year, especially, those three spiritual gifts seem to me to be absolutely essential to facing the fears, the very real fears, that our world is subjected to. So let me discuss them with you a bit, maybe in reverse order. Because the gift of not presuming to control the world's events is key. Reinhold Niebuhr once prayed during the very midst of World War II, "God grant us the serenity to accept those things that cannot be changed, the courage to change those things we can change, and the wisdom to know the difference." Adapted a bit and popularized by Alcoholics Anonymous, this has long struck me as quite close to the core of all genuine spirituality. Even in today's politics, let's please remember that those of us who support democracy are the ones who accept the results of the election as free and fair, even when our candidates don't prevail, unlike some of the people we most fear. We also accept the sound results of science and prefer facts to projections that keep proclaiming that everything we don't like is a conspiracy against us or a form of fake news. But let's be honest, most of us do still harbor the secret feeling that if we'd been consulted at the creation, we'd have been glad to give God a few tips on a better design. Or as the rabbis put it, God may have created order out of the underlying chaos, but he also let the chaos show through. And there's an old story comes to mind about an atheist, a minister, and a poet who were together at a holiday cocktail party. The atheist is a bit sloshed and starts complaining to the minister, "What the hell was your God thinking? There's too much of everything. Too many stars. Too much empty space. Too many damn people with too many different languages and ideas and religions. Why didn't he create some more unity?" Do you think God was showing off, says the poet? Or just a little drunk? And what, says the minister, pray tell, could have inebriated the creator of the universe? Oh, I don't know, says the poet, a wise woman. Love, maybe? We don't always like the freedom, the chaos, the diversity that is allowed in the world as we have it. Don't like how it's used anyway. Especially if we're activists who want to set the world right, or reformers. That great activist Angela Davis once famously declared, "I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change, I'm changing the things I can't accept." Which strikes me as fine, as long as one doesn't become, well, after overestimating one's powers to do so, bitter or despairing, which both individuals and democracies, in my observation, tend to do. We ignore history and experience at our peril. Some of us at the San Francisco Church have recently been reading historian Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny, 20 lessons from the 20th century, each illustrated from the real rise of genuinely fascist regimes. Don't obey in advance. Defend the democratic institutions. Defend civil society. Believe in truth. Investigate. Guard the language. Support good causes. Stay connected. Be a patriot who loves your fellow citizens, not a nationalist. Stay calm. Be courageous. The Master says that the second gift is moderation. I would take that to mean that before action, we need contemplation. We need to think before acting and be realistic about the limitations of our individual and collective powers. Moderation should never be confused with disengagement, however. That great soul, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who returned to his native Germany, even at the risk of his life, to resist the Nazis, taught that the essence of sin is the refusal of responsibility. But we should be responsible only Well, what did the Master say? By learning to control ourselves. And let's face it, another problem many of us have is that we have not sufficiently cultivated personal spiritual disciplines that can guide us through this time. Do come and practice mindfulness with Tovus. Last January, I took the step myself of seeking out a new spiritual director, with whose help I have redoubled my practice of beginning each and every day with at least a half hour of prayerful meditation and contemplation. And now I'm working on ending every day with an honest review of how I could have better used the precious gift of time. And you know what? It really has made me more thoughtful of others, more generous, more inclined to speak both honestly and yet with kindness, reaching out to people who are quite different from myself, to be generous not only in spirit, but also giving away more of what I used to fear I couldn't live without. And in this coming year, facing our own aging process, my wife and I will do the relinquishment of moving to a much smaller place in the nonprofit retirement community. Not only downsizing our household, but giving away more of the things we've accumulated, just as we found ourselves being more generous than ever in our support for our religious communities and the causes, the connections that we most care about. Tricia knows that for some years now, I've been an informal advisor to this congregation on its stewardship efforts, and I really commend to you. Finish this magic process that you have started to renovate this building and make it a true sanctuary of the Spirit. Make sure you are well funded so that the search committee and its team finds you the very best in spiritual leadership. For this second spiritual gift of disciplined moderation truly is the key to greater generosity of spirit and of pocketbook. And it is directly tied to the third spiritual gift that will be needed in this year ahead: compassion. The root of that word, you know, means to suffer together. To know that we are all fellow sufferers of limited power, with events around us that we cannot always control. Great philosopher Alfred North Whitehead said that his notion of God was the fellow sufferer who understands. And we must practice compassion not just in the abstract, but daily in concrete and very interpersonal ways. Whosoever would do good to another, said poet William Blake again in his poem Jerusalem, must do it in minute particulars. The general good is ever the plea of the hypocrite and flatterer. There are in our own midst, in our own communities, particular individuals who are threatened by the announced plans of the incoming administration. Our trans siblings, families that may face division through the potential deportation of a parent. UU congregations, like the one in San Francisco, are just now beginning to survey who falls within their care and purview, who's most at risk, and how can we prepare to support and defend them. And then there are the broader and more insidious plans, I think, that require exposure and resistance. Our own daughter, I'm proud to say, stands on the very front lines of defending low-income health care in our state. She's the president and CEO of the California Association of Public Hospitals and Health Systems. She negotiates the Medicaid arrangements between the state and the federal government. She's been to the White House twice this fall and knows that the plans to deepen and continue tax cuts for the wealthiest are being tied to somewhat delayed cuts, but real cuts in Medicaid. And first in states like ours that had the nerve to go ahead and provide gender-affirming care and cover undocumented people in need and cover the working poor. This promises to be real impact on real children and their families who will require naming. And I'm reminded of what we did in the San Francisco church during that last horrible period of family separations. We lifted up on Sunday mornings pictures and names of real children who had actually died as a result of our government's policies. No more nameless slaughter of innocents, particular and real stories told, because they have the power to change hearts and minds. So these are a few ways, my friends, 3 in number. By the way, Matthew never knew how many magi there were. Just magi. These are a few ways we can remember the ancient story that tells of divine love taking human form. How we can remember that spiritual discipline and moderation can save us from being self-indulgent and weak and make us more courageous. How we can avoid becoming self-important and overestimating our powers. Through compassion, through these 3 precious spiritual gifts, we can overcome the challenges that lie ahead and not be destroyed. For heaven arms with such gifts those whom it would save, who would be the embodiment here on earth of true compassion and enduring love. So may it be this year ahead and always. Amen.